Welcome back, guys. Welcome to another episode of Living Abroad, the podcast. As we promised that we're gonna have part two of this talk with our very own first African Caribbean councillor of Glasgow, Mr. Graham Campbell. Thank you so much for coming back.
Well, thank you for inviting me back on this. But it was a really you felt that last time we spoke, we crammed so much into that
Yeah,
little
yes,
we
yes.
had, and there's so
And
much more that could be said on all of that stuff we talked about. So I welcome the chance to have another bite.
exactly. And right at the end, as we were saying offline, right at the end, like your main concern was like you want to talk about how like the channels of how people can get to you and get their problems like resolved. I think if we can touch on that first.
Hmm.
Like if someone like first of all, maybe let me put it this way. You know when you're campaigning and then you get into the office, the what you are campaigning about, the issues are they still there? Is that the same issues you get, like complaints you get every day in your office? If you can explain some of the things you're campaigning for before you got into office.
Okay, well, I began as you can tell, I'm a Londoner by accent. So I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and then was politically active from mostly the 90s, really, in London, and also I'm Jamaican, so I partly went home as well. So I went to
Mm,
Canada. I lived in Canada briefly. So in all four countries, I've always been politically active, and so I've been a trade unionist all my life, and. Uh, when I was in England back in the day, I was in the Labour Party briefly. Um, Not now.
oh wow.
But I was a big fan of Jeremy Corbyn. So if I'd stayed in England, I probably would have been one of his supporters in the Labour Party. But in
Okay.
Scotland, I support independence, therefore that's why I'm in the SNP. But the long and short of it is I began as a Pan-Africanist and as a housing activist and an anti-racism campaigner. So those three things led me to do work with black tenants. So I'd done
Mm,
that in Peckham and in the London Borough of Southwark to do work to basically empower black tenants so that when they're facing the council or when they're facing any of the obstacles or experiences they were experiencing, developers trying to demolish their houses, for example, that happened to me. Also, reintegrating refugees, working across the different African communities, which is
mm,
important to do because African communities tend to hang with their own nationality and they don't work enough across the channels. So that's always been part of my sort of remit, doing Pan-African community work, fighting for your rights. And so when I came to Scotland, I happened to arrive in Sight Hill in North Glasgow, which happened to be an epicenter back in 1999, 2000,
mm,
2001. So when I arrived here in temporarily in 2001 and then permanently in 2002 and 3, I arrived in the middle of all of the stuff that was going on in that neighborhood. It was a council house kind of high-rise block community or scheme, as you'd say in Scotland,
mm.
and nearly 10,000 people lived there. There's 4,000 houses, so it's a big community of its own, and it was literally like a mile and a bit from George Square. So like we were in walking distance, but it's surrounded by all these motorways, and people. It was almost like a little island of poverty into itself. So many of the refugees that were then relocated to Glasgow under what they call the dispersal system. So they were. The UK government was forcibly relocating them away from London and the southeast, and they were brought to big cities like Glasgow.
Mm.
Uh, they didn't know they were coming to Glasgow. They didn't know what Scotland was when they come. So
Yeah,
they
a
were,
lot of people when I talk to them, yeah, that's what they say.
yeah. So many of them never heard of Scotland, didn't know
Mm,
about. Arrived in the middle of the night sometimes, and then were put in a flat, an empty flat, because this was an area of housing that nobody wanted to live in and was falling apart. And they were then arriving in a community with almost no facilities to support them, also with the community not being prepared for them to come. So
mm,
there was initially some racist backlash, but most community members from the Scottish community actually welcomed their neighbours. That was the majority of folks, and most people were quite helpful, but they had nowhere to help them from. So in my case, the community put together a community flat. They organised themselves into a tenants organisation. The refugees organised a refugee solidarity group. Uh, uh, Glasgow Campaign to Welcome Refugees, I think it was, and that. that still exists, by the way, so that's still around.
Mm,
But it was Afghans, Kurdish people, people from the Democratic Republic of Congo. We had a large community of them, and they were all settled in these high-rise flat communities. I've got two in my area, which was Sight Hill and Red Road Flats, as it was. And from there, you got people getting to know each other. We got parents fighting alongside each other to get better schooling for their
mm,
kids and also supporting each other through the problems of poverty, getting a food banks going and getting clothing hubs going. So that was all happening in the early 2000s. And also the struggle of the refugees to get rights. In Glasgow uniquely, we had a mass mobilization in those days, led by African women from the Caribou organization.
mm,
Uh, a shout out to them because the Caribou doesn't exist anymore, but it was originally a Pan-African women's group led by Congolese and Angolan and Zimbabwean women based in Springburn, which helped to lead the fight against deportations. We had a
mm.
strong against deportation. So I came into that with all my experiences of organizing black tenants, fighting racism,
It was
doing
no
Pan
brainer really for
so
you.
I was ideally sort of suited
Yeah.
to work in this environment. And the
Mm,
success was that, Side Hill became a really diverse community. We defeated the racists and fascists who tried to make noise there. But we did it through community action from below. We did it from fighting alongside each other with the
mm.
two things most important to us, rights, fighting poverty, or three things, and housing
Housing,
conditions.
yes.
Those are the three things that everybody had in common. So
Yeah.
by fighting on those things in common on a grassroots level and not talking down to people, but also not using highfalutin language, it was
Mm,
lots of people tried to politically exploit it, and they tried to, what they call parachuting. It's a political method where people come with some leaflets and posters and placards, and they arrive usually from comfortable middle class neighborhoods from the rest of the city,
mm,
and they arrive in a poor area, and then they don't do any work, they don't stay, they leaflet
mm,
for, and then they go away again. That's called parachuting. It's a political method which doesn't work, never has worked, won't defeat things. You have to do things which are long term, rooted in a
mm,
community. Your location within a community is how you fight these things. If you don't do the casework, which involves fighting people's battles, helping them, empowering them to get the gas bill paid or get the council
mm.
tax to back off from them, or anything like that. You have to do all of that work. It's
Yeah.
not, as you say, it's not sexy politics, in the grand scheme, but it's the stuff that matters to people's everyday life.
Yes. Like
So
the
I started
everyday
with that
stuff.
approach as an activist, and so I've carried that approach with me into the way I do my politics.
Okay. So now what I mean, you get into the office. Are you still getting like requests from the same things you were fighting for like 24 years ago? What is like the main things, the main issues today that Africans and immigrants and the minorities are still fighting for?
We are still in a way you could say that 24 years ago we there were African communities or minority communities from other countries where we've never had a relationship with Scotland before, and therefore not with Glasgow. So these were new to our city and our country, and there were new elements. So there was what these problems that you call the problem of settlement, which is, are you going to stay here? How long are you going to be here? Are you going to get your asylum leave to remain? Or if you're just an ordinary migrant, is this the career path and the place where you want to establish your career and your family? These are decisions people had to make 24 years ago. 24 years later,
Mm,
there are two generations now. There's people born here. There's kids who've been to school, university, and now are working themselves, who have their
mm,
own. So we can now say there's a Scottish African community and a Scottish African identity. And I think what's been
mm.
interesting to me is seeing that identity emerge in a
Yes.
real tangible way with all the places that we have now in the city centre, the African
Mm,
restaurants and bars. The Calabash has been a crucial place for that to happen. The African Caribbean Centre before it was another place for it to happen. Organizations like ACWA, African Caribbean Women's Association, the Nigerian community through the Igbo Union, the Ghanaians through the Welfare Association. These have been crucial organizations and people. And also, you've got to pick up the Cameroonians. The
mm,
Cameroonians have a massive contribution to stuff, especially in my area. There's a group called African Challenge Scotland, led by a guy called Ronnie Edumeni, who've been really brilliant. The Cameroons have been excellent citizens, as have the Gambians as well. So they've been great at community organizing, empowering, getting these things across, and crucially, working with each other.
Mm,
That's not happening enough, but they're amongst the people that do that across different African communities. So I think we're more settled and established. So the problems we have now are about settlement and establishment. Families who've now got grown-up children, they've had their council house maybe for 10 or 15 years, but they're overcrowded, or they need help to get to the next stage. And we're affected by those problems of now being settled here permanently and having a wider community. And it's a
mhm,
political question of whether the community has enough political power to get its demands or its interests seen to. That took the Asian community maybe 30 or 40 years to get settled and have power to then make a difference to who's elected and then how the
mhm.
system works. Um, Obviously, we've only been. Well, I was elected in 2017, and at the time I was elected alongside a Nigerian Conservative guy. He lost his seat in 2022, so I've been left as the only one from
Wow.
our community. And I have to say that being the only one is quite difficult,
Yeah.
because obviously I get a lot of casework that's not from my constituency. I represent Springburn and Rob Royston, but I get constituency casework from all over the city and often from outside the city. And many times I have to go and locate a councillor in their area that will support them with their work, but I'll support what that councillor does in helping them. But
Mm,
sometimes the political questions we have is about how the system treats us, and how it works with us. Sometimes arbitrary power and, or I'd have to say, institutional racism is used against us. And
mhm.
my role is often being present in rooms where policy is decided, and particularly in my case, education policy, and trying to look at the system and how and to iron out those discriminations and those actions which would prejudice the interests of my people. So
Yeah. But
I'm
would you
often
say that that is outside what your day job is supposed to be? But you had to tap into. I think it's very important to mention that. That will answer some of the questions because if someone says, "Oh, I didn't get help, I did send a request," but to understand that when you are there alone, like how is it like for you? Do
um
you have to
there's
do you have to lose votes, like you're voting for something and people not understanding, and you're losing votes within the party? Like if you want to change things, how hard is it for you being the only one? What does that mean when you say that?
it's hard, but it gives you a platform. One thing about being elected is that for some reason people listen to your voice more because you're elected.
Mm,
I said the same things to all the people in power I tried to meet. I tried to meet the chief executive of the Housing Association Weekly Group many years ago. I campaigned, even helped occupy their office once with some pensioners from my community. Yeah, so
mm.
I had to occupy their office to meet them back in the days. Now I can just phone them and they'll speak
Wow.
to me.
I need to be speaking
So
to you more. I need to be speaking to you more. I'll get more people for my podcast then.
you know what I mean? But it's a fact that because you have some access to power, it's
Yeah.
then a question of how you use it to open those channels of power up to people that need that
Hmm.
empowerment. So often, I suppose it's understanding how the structure works, and it's what Sir Jeff Palmer, my good friend, would call system knowledge, knowing how that power, how it's divided, who holds it locally, who the person that you're dealing with is answerable to. If you know the structure that they're answerable to, you can use it to hold them to account. So if you know that if you go to the counter at the council and somebody speaks to you in a disrespectful manner, well, who's in charge of that? Well, it will be a specific department of the council. How is that department held to account? It's usually a council committee of some sort. All councils have policy and scrutiny committees to which they're answerable. So I'm the head of the education committee. So all schools, all education, all nurseries ultimately are answerable to that committee. And so if the
That's
director
your
of
department. Yes.
yes. So that director of the committee of the education service reports to us, and his officers have to write written reports to us about attainment, education, finance, funding of schooling, school placing, all the policies around education get brought to me every year. In fact, every 6 weeks is reported to me, right? I have a pre-agenda meeting in between, so where the agenda is discussed. I make sure that school children and their teachers are able to come to the committee and give evidence to us.
Mm.
It's like a parliamentary committee, like. So this is the power we have to hold the system to account, and in that we have regular report. I've made sure because I'm there. I've made sure that there's a regular report around equalities, which includes race equality. So there is a strong race equality strategy in my committee, and I don't
So
think
what?
it would be as strong if I
Yeah,
wasn't present in that room.
exactly. Yeah. Uh-huh. I get you.
So partly it's about how to use the system, but then it's a question of just you have to stand up for your rights, but you have to know
Mm.
what your rights are. And this is the thing, a lot of people don't really understand that you can query these things. And I suppose if you come
Mm.
from a country where you don't have democracy or freedom, you know not to
Mhm.
challenge the state. It's not the natural thing to do for you to challenge what the state or a bureaucrat does, because obviously the context of that from back home, particularly the police. But here you have some democratic rights to challenge those. That's one of the committees I sit on. In fact, I've got the meeting next week, and I question them regularly on how they use tasers, how they treat black people, and I force them to get regular statistics to give breakdowns of
Mm.
offences and also categories of racial categories of the victims, so that we know who's being victimized. And
Mm.
I know from those figures, because I've asked for them, that although there are some really appalling incidents between police and our people, particularly car stops, particularly searches, those sorts of things.
Mm.
It seems to be worse on the transport police side and at the airport, but actually on the day-to-day level, the level is not as bad as, say,
Mm.
down south in England. We don't have that same degree of violence or disrespect. However, when it happens, we need to hold it to account, and the
Yes.
system hold it to account a little bit better here. I am on that committee, therefore I can ask the city commander for Glasgow, well, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? I can do that because I'm there. If I
Mm.
wasn't, those questions would not be asked.
Mm. I get you. And in education, what are some of the issues that we still are struggling with, but we fail to raise them up because we think like we don't have a voice. Like if you are here on your student visa, you brought your children here, you feel like, okay, you're just thankful that your child got placement. What are some of the things that, immigrants don't know that they have the rights to?
You might not have the right to elect the member of the Westminster Parliament, but if you're paying the council tax and you're here legally, you can, and you are a constituent of the member of the Scottish Parliament. You are a constituent of your local councillor. So those two areas, you have ultimate total rights. You're the citizen there. Doesn't matter if you're not a national of the UK, you are the citizen. You're paying the taxes. Therefore, no taxation without representation. You have a right to expect those services from the state. The
Mm.
state protects your civil liberties. It must provide education, health, and all the other things it's supposed to do. And you have a right to question how they do it. And you use your councillors as the main vehicle to do that. You use your MSPs as the main vehicle to do that. We have a very strong ethos in Scotland about the citizen having a say in these matters. We have lots of consultation structures. They can be bureaucratic, and sometimes they're not as perfect as they should be, because I think
Mm-hmm.
it tends to be that it's retired people, usually retired white people with time to do these things, during the day. Working people find that very difficult, and obviously pretty much all of us are working during the day. So if these things, that's one of the things that the system could do better, make it more accountable so that people can question officials during evenings. That needs to change so that you can
Mm-hmm.
have a chance. But we have things called community councils. I don't know how many people out there know this, but every place in Scotland has a territorial community council. And what a community council is, it's citizens that come together who are formally recognised by their council
Mm-hmm.
as people they have to dialogue with, and they have rights. They receive documents around planning applications, for example, and they can object to them. They get them in advance, and that's the regular way I always meet my community councillors.
I don't
Is
even know who mine is. I don't even know where I stay. Who is?
right. Well, on your council website, it should have a website in their portal, a link to the community councils, and it should tell
Mm-hmm.
you, show you a map of the community council areas, and it should give you a contact for the local community council. Community councils are, although they're elected locally among citizens, they are registered with the council of officers. So council officers, give them their budget, and so they're held accountable that way. So they have
Mm-hmm.
to certain rules, but they have general meetings. Usually they're between June and October, most of them. And your neighbourhood, if it doesn't have one, that's the other thing. If it doesn't have an active one, and there are lots of parts of the city that don't, and Glasgow has about 90, uh, you can set up one, and you can get your help from the council to set one up. And I wish more of our people did that, help to set them up where they don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
One of the issues is also access of our people into those spaces and feeling comfortable with those spaces. But we need more of us to be community councillors, to attend, be part of planning your local community. Because even if you are only going to be here 5 or 10 years, you want those 5 or 10 years to be as good and as best as possible. You have to create the conditions for your family to thrive, and to do that, part of that is creating a good local community. So
Mm-hmm.
even if it is temporary, you might think it's temporary. I thought it was temporary. This is some of the things
Wow.
24 years ago when I came. I enrolled in a course at Strathclyde, expecting that I would do the course and then go back to Jamaica. Uh,
Mm.
he's still here, nearly 25 years later. So you just don't know. So it's better to invest that time, because the more time you invest, the safer it will be for your children to feel integrated, to feel safe. You have to create that safe community.
Yes, and one of the things that I found challenging, because I'm in Blantyre, and you can, like, as you can imagine, Blantyre, there's not a lot of like Africans around, especially with the time when I first arrived here with my small children. And you can sort of feel, I mean, there was a lot of bullying around. Is that something that you guys talk about or consider where you're placing people?
Right.
But I
So
felt so out of place here. I mean, I'm okay now, but it was such a shock to the system. It's like, why would these people just dump me here? That's how I felt.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't reckon it would be taken into account in terms of where you're placed. But I suppose it's your housing need and how that's identified. It might
Mm,
be that's the only part of their local authority where the available housing was for the farm the size that you have, you
yeah.
know, and also timing when you happen to apply will determine, when
Yeah.
what where you're sent. But in Glasgow, we obviously, because it's so big and the housing providers, so many housing providers, we've got one main one, but there are dozens of smaller housing associations. And part of the lack of system knowledge is knowing where you can apply. You know, there are dozens of them.
Okay.
Having the right intelligence to know, well, that one's not worth going to apply for because they don't have any spare housing, or this one does. These are your chances of not waiting. So, these are system knowledge stuff, which it seems that lots of us don't tend to know because we don't have enough networking going on with the indigenous community around us. We don't have that advantage.
Mm.
So really important that we share that knowledge with each other. And one of the roles, I don't know if you know the uh, National African and Black Association, Scotland. You know about them?
No, I don't know them. No.
Right, that's the new body that's been set up by the family of Sheku Bayu. That's Addie Johnson and Caddy Johnson. So that's his sister and brother-in-law. So their response to the inquiry into their loved one's death has been to set up an organization of African communities who all have had exactly those sorts of problems with police,
Mm-hmm.
council, social service. So they've set up a national organization to represent that, and it's working in a number of commissions, which on different themes. And I'm involved in the education one, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But that organization, which they're leading, is precisely dealing with exactly those sorts of questions. That have a hub where you can find this knowledge and
Mm-hmm.
available to you. No, oh yeah, there's an African group there that you can go to. There's a church or there's a mosque, there's a school, there's an anti-racism group in that school. These are things that you need
Yeah,
to know so you feel confident in the area you're going to. But also crucially, when you hit a problem, knowing where to report it and how to do so.
it's important.
Yeah.
You can't just sit with the problem. And I think that is the main topic today. It's like you need to find these things. They are there. If they are not there, you can start your own, like what you just said, like your community. Um,
Council. Yeah.
yes. And the other thing, how important is it for us to join I usually get emails at the start of the year for the children to be on the board for the school governing body,
Please, please join your parent council. Please,
parent
please, please,
council.
please. Because the reason why it's important you're there is because it obviously dialogues with the head teacher in the school, but the head teacher dialogues with councillors like me and with the Directorate of Education around anti-racism policies, bullying policies. You go on the website, you see that the parent council and the school will publish all the policies in place around
Mm.
educational and so on. It's all there. So use those policies. But if you're a member of that parent council, you have the right to be consulted by everything in that school and how it does it. So don't complain about something the school has done or not done if you're not prepared to be on the parent council. It's
Yes.
worth, you know, it doesn't take up too much of your time if you're not the chair or the secretary. You just go to a meeting every month, and that's worth it for your child to be protected or to at least have know that their interests and your interests as a parent is represented in that room. Because
Yes.
1/5 of the people in my city are from an ethnic minority background, so that should mean that at least 1 in 5 of every parent councillor should be from a minority group. They're
But they are
not, but
not there. They are not doing it.
we need to be there.
Be in the room. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm gonna let you go. Um, like I said to you, it takes a special person to raise your hand. It's not just for everyone to say, yes, I'll do it. So that is what so what you are doing, honestly, it might not seem like when you get like a negative response sometimes I don't know how what it does to you, but honestly, it's not everybody that raises their hand. People like me, I just saw, oh my God, I don't like this. I don't like this in this area, but I just keep quiet.
Well, yeah, I understand why people wouldn't. There's so much pressure in family life, the cost of living, COVID, everything
Mm,
we've been through this last few years. Just getting back to normal and just surviving that and just getting used to things being back the way they were. That's putting your life on track and putting it in the way you want it. It's important that you get that. If you have spare capacity though, and you care about what happens in your community, if you do so, it's worth it because you can change people's lives for the better, and you obviously can change your community for the better. So I definitely want to encourage people to stand. The 2027 council elections are soon upon us, and most political parties are starting the process of selecting their candidates now for 2027. You're
okay.
already too late for Holyrood. Most of the parties have already got through the process now. So,
Okay.
but if you're thinking about, consider whether you want to be a local councillor, because certainly we need some help here. There needs to be more of us. I really would
And you
encourage.
just inspired me. So what does the person need to do to be a local councillor?
You need to decide two things. One, which party you're going to go in. You have to be very active in that party. And what active means that you're helping to plan and support existing, they have by-elections. So there's currently by-elections going on in Glasgow. So turn out for your local party candidate in that so that the local activists know you. Yeah. Speak in those meetings, pass resolutions, put motions forward, speak at the conferences. If you're a delegate, be delegated to the conference and be active so that people can see you working away. Most candidates are chosen by the members of that party in an electronic ballot. So they have to know you and have
Mm,
confidence. Yeah. You
okay.
stand out. People will remember you more differently than everybody else because, oh yeah,
Yes.
that's the guy with the hat and the red, right? So
Yes.
use that advantage, the
Okay.
fact that people will remember you. But be active. Don't expect, and also don't expect that your CV, your professional CV, and all the things that you've done, your master's degree, that doesn't matter as much as your activism
You're
does, and
active.
your
Yeah.
capability that if you show that, oh look, I raised thousands for charity in my local group for a community centre in my area, that's
Mhm.
way more impressive. If you've been chair of the parent council, that's way more impressive than your academic qualifications to the people who are going to select you as the candidate. Yeah.
Mhm.
But think about that way. One of the other things as well is women. There's generally all parties have problems recruiting women for some obvious reasons because council work doesn't pay enough. That's the start. So we
Mhm.
try and solve that. So in the near
Mhm.
future, the next
Yes.
councils will be paid a lot better. So that's a good thing. They'll have a minimum salary of 31K. So that would be great. So it's now a job that you can afford to actually live on if you do
Okay.
it.
Hmm.
So that will help more women make it possible for them to do this job. But yes, there are, I won't lie, there's some problems about you get some nasty attacks on social media,
Hmm.
especially so if you're black, especially so if you're a black woman. That's where we are
Hmm.
at 21st century culture. But the more of us that are there, the more protection we can give us ourselves.
Okay. Thank you so much. I just felt inspired. And maybe one day when you have a program, you need to invite us. I'm doing like I have a drama group here in like with the local kids. It was my response to the bullying and racism that was happening with the kids. I was like, let me bring them together. So I started a little like a theater group. So one day, if you have a program that they will come and perform one of these days, let me know.
Okay, yeah. You promise.
Yeah, so we'll be teaching them marimba, African songs, like all the children, like black, white, like Asian, just that unity with the kids. Because most of the time, you just find out that these kids are just, they've never seen or interacted with, like an African before. So just come, play together, learn each other's songs, learn each other's national anthem, and see, what happens. So, yes, we'll come through to Glasgow one of these days. Invite us.
I'll think about how to do that. All right.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
You take care, Pamela. All the best.